Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, because we've got the hour, haven't we? So, let's kick off and as other people join. So, welcome. Good morning. To the third of 5 seminars, although we're thinking we're going with a sixth one, an additional one. We're just planning that out. But basically, these seminars are looking at the unique aspects of running a family-owned business. All businesses are theoretically the same, but those of us who've had experience of being involved in a family-owned business will understand the added complexities that come with that. So my name's Tony Lockwood, and I'm an operating partner within the professional services firm gunnercooke. And across our sort of operating partner and legal practices of around 300 partners, we've got extensive knowledge and experience of working with owners of family businesses at all stages, from new starts up to to third generation, and that experience has provided us with an insight into those additional challenges. As I said, that those challenges that all businesses have, but where they're a little bit more complex if you're part of a family-owned business. And those 5 areas, just to repeat from previous seminars that we've run, those 5 areas are profitability and growth. The need, as all organisations need profitability and growth, but as a family-owned business, as the family unit grows and more people get involved, the demands from the family from that business grow exponentially, and so there's that extra driver to fund the lifestyles of a bigger and wider family unit. The second area that we covered on the last webinar was succession, not just succession of the senior person, but bringing in family members into management teams when there are non-family members in that management team, and understanding that dynamic and the challenges that creates, and obviously how to mitigate some of the risks that is associated with that. We covered that off in the second webinar. Just to say, we're recording all of these as well, so they are available afterwards. One thing to point out, it's an open forum today. We've got the chance to edit out any comments that you don't want to go into the public domain. So we will, please feel free to be open and transparent and talk openly, but we can edit out anything that you wouldn't want to go into the public domain. The third session is today's, and that's today we're going to focus on strategy and vision. And very much aligning, making sure that the business vision and the business strategy is aligned to the family vision and family strategy, and the added complexity of where second, third generation people get involved in, where one part of the family might want to go down one direction and another want to go down another direction, and then you've got the third aspect, which is the business. All of these will interact, and all of the sessions interact really, and probably one of the core elements that comes out of these issues and these challenges is potential conflict, and that's the subject area of the 4th episode, which we're running in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And Rebecca's going to get involved in that. Rebecca's on the call today, and that's really looking at how, again, conflict within the family can have an impact upon the business, and also how disagreements within the business can have a massive impact within the family. And we're talking about mediation and stuff like that on the 4th one. And the final one is we'll focus upon governance and really the challenges of having theoretically 2 governance processes, one for family members, one for non-family members, and how that can create challenges and issues, and the benefits of having independence on the board of family-owned business, so you can get that sort of professionalism and that independence of thought, I suppose, is probably the best way. So that's the 5th one, and as I said, we are just talking in the background to think about a 6th, an additional one. So today, as I said, we're going to cover the subject area of vision and strategy, and I'm joined on this by 2 operating partners, Andy Bates and Sean Hughes. Sean is just in the process of joining gunnercooke as an operating partner. His background's very much big blue chip organisations, but then his first half of his career was in big blue chip organisation. Second half of his career has been working and running family-owned businesses, and working and helping family-owned businesses manage that transition. So he's got some very recent personal experience that he'll share with us today as well. It is an interactive session. There's no slides. It's a discussion. We're going to have a series of questions, but let's just talk around those subject areas. Use the questions as a subject area. We've got a few that we're going to drop in, but feel free to ask any questions that you have. But more importantly, to share your experience as well, because we've all, if we're working with family-owned businesses, we'll all have war stories, we'll all have some successes, and it's actually the real purpose of these sessions is to start to share that best practice and share that experience so that we can learn from it and take it forward with organisations that we're working with. Is that okay? And any questions before we move on? Okay, so if we sort of go on to the first question that we just want to talk about, Andy, can you share an example of an organisation that you've worked with where parts of the family wanted to progress down one path whilst another wanted to go down a slightly different route, and what was the impact of that?
Okay, so the business I'm going to talk about was complicated. That there was actually two families involved in the one business. There was two brothers on either side. So there's four directors, two sets of brothers. And this is about 7 or 8 years ago. Business down south, a homewares business, quite a traditional business, selling into predominantly independents through an agent network. So quite an old-fashioned business to all intents and purposes. And we helped facilitate an exit for two of those four directors, a brother on each side. One of the brothers was 60, so was coming to the end of his career. The other gentleman was in his mid-40s. So we helped execute an exit for those two brothers. And once we got in there, it became very, very clear that there was, lots of conflict, a lack of strategy and vision for the business. And what became apparent within the first month was there was no leadership across that business per se. The brother that was in his 60s that was leaving, he was the de facto leader just by function of age, not to do with capability. He was actually the finance director. And therefore, he was acting as a consolidator in terms of all conversations. There was no one that was actually leading the business forward. And how that manifested itself was there was a lack of communication across the organization. I think it employed about 60 people internally in an agent network of about 20 people. We spent lots of time in those first couple of months just communicating with the rest of the team. It was very apparent there was a lack of communication in terms of where the business was going, point one. Secondly, there were conflicts between the different brothers, and quite frankly, people were either on one side or the other. So it became very territorial in terms of what side they were on, not actually aligning themselves to where the business was going. And interestingly, the person that had the vision and strategy for taking the business forward was the younger brother that exited. So after about 3 months, we recognized he was actually the leader out of the four, but hadn't had the right infrastructure to facilitate him being the leader. So after 3 months, we had a conversation with him and said, look, we can see what has happened. We'd like to work with you to put a structure in place for you to come back into the business and be the leader to take the business forward. And I guess we were the independent to sort of come in and act as the conduit to start to bring those pieces of the jigsaw together and take the family conflict out of the way. And what we did is we brought in an FD who had worked in family businesses, so knew the dynamics of it, a very experienced FD, so he had that gravitas about him. We brought the brother back into the business as MD, and we sat on the board as an independent non-exec. So we put an infrastructure in place and just gave very clear roles and responsibilities to both the guy coming back into the business, but the brothers that were also still in the business. So there was an absolute clarity on what their roles and responsibilities were day in, day out. But also from a board level, we had that diversity of thought. And it took a long time, but we took the business on that journey. And once we started to communicate that across the whole of the organization, it had such an impact in the performance of the individuals and ultimately the performance of the business, because they had that clarity of thought in terms of what the vision and strategy was and who was doing what role.
And how did you find the family unit responded to those suggestions? Because they would have been quite radical suggestions, bearing in mind that there were, as you say, at least two parties that were looking at things in completely different ways. You know, when you were going in with the proposed way forward, bringing this brother back in as MD, presumably there was some reticence there or some resistance. What can you just explore that a little bit further?
Yeah, I think in short, Tony, it was sort of divide and conquer. There was not, you know, one sort of round robin conversation, as it were. I think we canvassed opinion, first of all, from the two directors that did stay and the two respective brothers that stayed in. So what we didn't want to do is usurp their responsibility and just say, look, here's what we're thinking. Here's how we'd like to go about it. So we took them on a journey, and that took, you know, several months. And I think what we helped them do is not just in terms of bringing this individual back into the business, we helped them think about what the strategy and vision for the business was. There was a complete lack of vision and strategy in the business. It was very old-fashioned. It was an agent network. And what was apparent was they did want to take the business forward. They wanted to put products on Amazon. They wanted to build a trade website. They just didn't know where to start. So once we could start to show how not just bringing this individual back in the business, but bringing in a new FD, us sat on the board, and how we could start to take the business forward and actually explore the areas they've wanted to do, but just not being able to do. So it was a two-pronged strategy, really. One on the personnel side, but secondly, holding their hand in terms of achieving where the business wants to go, that they were in complete agreement on. You know, that's where they wanted to take the business. They just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And I suspect one of the aspects there was the fact that you had that independence. You could step back and look at things completely differently.
Yeah,
Martin, you want to just ask or
yeah,
make a comment?
If I can just jump in at that point, Andy, how did you get around getting an honest engagement from them, given that there were all these conflicting viewpoints and opinions?
I think that the starting point, I always start this in any situation in terms of honest engagement. You've got to build trust with them. And I think in terms of building that trust, it's listening to them. You know, it's one of the first things for people that don't know me. I worked in private equity for a number of years before I set up my own businesses. And one of the first things I was told in private equity is listen. Yeah, you know, you've got to listen. It's an underutilized skill. And I think a lot of the emotion was there because they felt they hadn't been heard. And I think we spent a lot of time just speaking, listening, and really building that trust and saying, look, we've got involved in this business because we don't want to just do the status quo, because it was apparent, you know, the business was starting to go backwards. We've come in here to help take the business to the next journey. And we want to work with you and bring some of our knowledge to the table, but obviously work alongside the likes of you guys that have actually been in the business for a period of time. So it's not something we forced or rushed. We just took time building those relationships, building that trust, and showing there was a commonality in what we were looking to achieve with the vision and strategy and what they were looking to achieve with the vision and strategy.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's difficult to actually get people to open up because they've probably had a number of years of conflict between them. Yeah. But your independence, mine, Tony, Sean, whatever, will probably bring that extra little bit of space where people can think, at least I can say something, and get it out in the open.
Yeah, and I think it was it was getting that legacy off their shoulders, as it were. You effectively act as a counsellor to them in many instances.
Yeah, I find I'm often mediating not disputes but differences of opinion that have never been expressed properly for other people in whatever the management group is, to understand where other people are coming from.
Absolutely. Sean, you've got something to add?
Yeah, Martin, the last occasion I came across what you've just described and what was the challenge, and I was trying to figure out how best to deal with it. Because I couldn't get any interaction with the 3 directors in the room, what I did was we just did a simple, what is the organisation and what are the roles within the organisation? And then by asking each of the individuals to explain what their roles were, with it recorded on a whiteboard on this particular occasion, what you were able to demonstrate is there was just massive gaps in the organisation. And it's funny, once you've identified those gaps, you actually can't stop them talking, because they all want to talk about why those gaps exist. And what have you. So by simply just asking, what is the organisation? Sorry, go on, mate.
I had a similar problem a few months ago. I simply got the directors to describe what they did.
And
all of a sudden someone says, I didn't know you did that. Or isn't somebody doing this? And everybody goes, well, no, we've never discussed it. How about we have a chat then?
Yeah, and the quickest way to get that discussion going, if you're doing it with the group of directors, is for someone to say something that someone else doesn't agree with, and then it tends to flow then. But you've got to mediate. You can't be seen to have, as we all know, you can't be seen to have an opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
Until you get to the point where, as Andy says, where you've built that trust that they want to listen to you.
Yeah, sorry, hijack that one a little bit, but it was interesting.
No, it's really good. Yeah. Anybody else got any examples or any additional questions on that area before we move on to the next part? No?
Maybe just a question, if I may, Tony. It's Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
I'm calling in from Belgium, by the way. So good morning. But I'm still a bit puzzled, because you have also some legal constraints, and family businesses have also some governance, be it minimal. But I still struggle with the fact that if you have 4 brothers, some of them want to remain, some want to step out. There is a financial aspect, so I don't see those stepping out being very, very conducive to the other ideas, because they just want to see the money. But then you have also some legal constraints. I could imagine they could take a lawyer in and fight the decision of bringing an external MD in.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that could well be one of the challenges that the family business has and often do have. But it's working through that process, isn't it? It's like anything. It's there's a conflict, there's a difference of opinion, and it's getting to the point, and as Andy was saying, helping that sort of facilitating those discussions to get some sort of consensus. Worst case scenario, that consensus doesn't happen, and then you've got to go down a much more sort of litigious route. But it's that's there only tends to be one winner there in those occasions, and those are the lawyers that are involved in managing that sort of conflict. But it's not necessarily good for either the business or the family. So that's the definitely in some cases the final nail, I suppose. But where I suppose where we try to, when we get involved and we try to intervene, it's to try to avoid that. And we often do get involved when the starting point is that absolute conflict or difference of opinion. There's one I got involved in a few years ago where we'll talk about it in more detail, but it was third generation grandson wanted to take the firm in one direction. The grandfather who set the business up and still controlled it quite, in terms of he was the majority shareholder, etc., etc. Still wanted to run it in the same way he'd run it in the 60s when he set it up, and the world had moved on, and that it was at one stage the grandson and the son or the grandson and the son of the founder just weren't talking, because he was almost seeing himself as piggy in the middle. It was like, do I go with my son or do I go with my father? And there was massive breakdown of confidence, breakdown of trust, and breakdown of relationships within the family unit. First thing we had to do is get them around the table almost and start talking, as Sean was just saying there. Really start to just get out onto the table all of the issues, all of the concerns, and all of the difference of opinions, and then start to look, bring in that external perspective and that external view to say, well, this is what's happening in the world today. This is what's happening with the competition. This is what's happening in the sector. How are you going to adapt, and what do you need to do? And ultimately, you know, in that case, the conclusion was that a watered down version of the grandson strategy was taken forward. In my opinion, as an external observer, it was definitely the right way to go, because if they hadn't gone through that change, the business wouldn't have survived much longer, because the world had moved on, the competition had moved on, they were losing revenues. But it's bringing it down to real, I suppose, brass tacks. What does it mean if we stay where we are? What's the impact? If we go down route A, what's the impact? If we go down route B, what's the impact? And all the various other options.
Maybe an additional question, just quickly. Would you recommend to document this and have people sign off, perhaps?
Daniel, what I was going to say was, the one thing you have to do is find the one thing you can agree on, and in many cases it will just be an EBITDA figure, but make sure it's recorded in the board minutes.
Yeah.
It's got to be in the board minutes. Yeah. And therefore you have to have a meeting structure, whatever, but in the board minutes, sign it off in the board minutes, and then it's a matter of record then. And if people want to get legal about it, you can say, well, we all agreed as a board, this was our EBITDA target, and this is, and therefore the consequential issues are here. And that way we, because it's recorded, and if you send your board minutes external, if you've got banks or whatever involved and you share your minutes with the banks, that does not keep people honest once they're outside the business.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Sean. There's one example I had in my private equity days where we backed a business, three brothers, and at the outset, one of the brothers, said, "Look, after probably 3 years, I want to go." Yeah, and we said, "Well, we might be exited at that stage. We might not." But what we very clearly did, very, very early on, just picking up on what you did, Sean, is go, okay, well, first of all, we know that person's agenda, that they do want to leave within 3 years. So there was the succession element of that, and actually agreeing what we would do to bring someone in 12 months ahead of that exit event, but also how we would look to value that person's shares. Now, we were quite lucky. We'd just done a transaction, so we could use the metrics of the transaction that we had done and said, well, if it's this EBITDA at that multiple, and you've got 20%, etc., then we can very clearly work it out. So it just took that conflict off the table straight away by even coming up with a range, of multiple. It might be between 5 and 6, depending on what's going on. You can benchmark it. We said we can go out and talk to corporate finances and actually get a benchmark on what valuations are at that stage. So I think it's about having a process that you all agree to, not necessarily always agreeing it down to the final penny, but having a process and a mechanism that you all agree on, and a time frame, because that succession element is very, very important as well. That person cannot just leave and you actually haven't had a chance to prepare for it. So as with all things, the more you can plan, discuss, document, then you've got that solid footing in terms of the conversations moving forward.
I think there's the other point I would raise, and we're going on to another part of the session, but it's also the importance of, there's various ways of describing this, but family boards, especially when you've got external investors involved, the last thing that you want to do almost is wash the family laundry around the board table within the business when the banks are there or the investors are there and stuff. But those family issues need to be resolved, and so there's some really good best practice advice is to, especially when you're getting involved in larger family units that have got these disparate ideas about how they want to move forward, is to establish a family board that acts as that has all of those discussions, has all of those challenges and issues resolved within the family, so that the family then can go with on block almost to have that discussion with any external investor. So the same issues that we've just been talking about, Daniel, around how to overcome those challenges exist, but you're doing it and facilitating a family board rather than a corporate board. It's just to try to separate the two, and there's definitely been lots of best practice ideas and best practice concepts come out of those family board sort of discussions. Has anyone had experience of getting involved in one of those?
No.
No. Okay. So Andy, just going back, you've done quite a lot of work in recent years around sort of the effectiveness of boards generally. How do you think that can support family-owned businesses? Do you know what the experience that you've had in that? How do you think that could sort of fold nicely into a family-owned business?
Yeah, I think not just with family-owned businesses, but a lot of boards. I think what I've seen with particularly family-owned businesses, they operate in a way that they've always operated. So they don't know how to operate any differently. And by that, I mean, it might be a half a day board meeting. You start with, the financials, you go around and you talk about, each functional area, and actually it becomes very stale. So what they're actually not doing is actually using the board effectively to actually talk about what the business needs to talk about. And again, a rule that was taught to me very early on in my professional career is a good board meeting should be 80% looking forward and 20% reflecting. But I've observed in a lot of businesses, and particularly family-owned businesses, it's too much looking backwards, what has happened, and very much focused on the financials in particular. So I think what's important here is that diversity of thought, that independence, whether that's a chairperson, whether it's a non-executive, to actually show how they can get more out of boards and actually what they should be talking about at board meetings as well. I think with family-owned businesses, they do getting too much into the detail and actually talking about tactical stuff that should sit outside of the board meeting. But again, because they've not been exposed to a different environment, they don't know any differently. So what I've noticed is going in and actually trying to show what a high performing board looks like, but starting to take them on a journey. It's not saying, no, actually, you shouldn't do it that way, you should do it this way. I think you start to introduce one or two concepts at a time, bed them in and take them on a journey. So for example, personally in board meetings, I put financials towards the back of the board meeting, because if the papers are actually distributed before the board meeting, which they should, and everyone's read them, the financials are merely the outputs of everything that's going on in the business. So if you spend that 80% talking about the inputs and what you should be doing and making decisions, you shouldn't be sat there for 2 hours going through the financials. And just changing that dynamic in its own right is really interesting. But also just starting to introduce one or two members of the second tier management into the boardroom. Not every board, but maybe 1 in 3 for them to come in and talk about their subject area. But the key is not just to get them in and talk, it's for the board to set a topic and an agenda item for them to answer. So the board collectively is actually getting an answer to a particular question, which they might think they know, but they've not had the opportunity to take back and think and appraise it. And nearly in all instances, they always get something out of it, because you're just bringing that discipline and that structure to the board table. So they're my observations. I think they know what they know, and you've got to take them on a journey to make them enjoy board meetings and feel they're getting something out of a board meeting, rather than it's just a talk shop.
Yeah, it reminds me of something I read many years ago. It was a book written by what's it? I can't remember what his first name is, but Timpson, the shoe repairers,
Yeah.
and he talks about upside down management, and his team in the shops, the frontline team, are, as far as he's concerned, the most important people within the business, and you'll go in actively engage with them on an ongoing basis to really understand what's going on in the business, and doesn't necessarily rely on his board members to collate that in the right way. And it is that, isn't it? It's about extracting that knowledge and bringing those people into the decision-making process as much as possible, so that you've got real data and real life examples of what's going on in the business, and not watered down reports. So someone, I was talking to someone the other day, and I do a lot of work around sort of program management, and they said, and they were talking about the watermelon effect. It's green on the outside but red on the inside. And actually, I thought that was really good in terms of reporting. That, you know, that's what happens as far as the board's concerned. Everything's green until you start to dig into it, and then you realise everything's red. And it's that you know, it's that way of getting that real life data back into your business and into your boardroom to make those decisions moving forward.
But the other nuance around that is that you've got the board, and you've got an organisation and roles of the directors. But the next thing to check is, what is the meeting structure, and what is the cadence of the meeting structure that sits below the board? Because if there isn't a meeting structure, there's nothing to report. And therefore, one of the reasons why a family board can end up just discussing the same old is because they actually aren't flowing any structure back into the organisation. You know, a Monday morning ops meeting doesn't cover it. That is not enough. So there has to be a cadence, and therefore there's a bunch of data coming out of those meetings that should flow to the board, with the owners of those meetings bringing it.
I think that's a really good point, Sean. I think this holds true for all board meetings, not just family boards. But you can sit there in a board meeting and someone's there, take a minute, and you take actions. Very rarely will they go, who else needs to know this information? And it's something that I've introduced in every board meeting. I sit in and go, who else needs to know this information? And not just who. How are you going to tell them? Quite frankly, sending an email is not the most efficient way to actually talk about a key decision that you've made at a board. We've all probably been to client pitches over the years, and the days when we could go out, I remember, you know, you'd come out of a client pitch, or we went to see a new investment opportunity. You go to the coffee shop and have a debrief. You would. That's what you do. You should do that in a board meeting. Post-board meeting, have a debrief with the people that need to know those key actions, and talk through those key decisions and the impact it has. And it's such an easy thing to do, but becomes a very, very close shop. And I think it does manifest itself more with family-owned businesses, for sure. But that's so important. What information has to filter across the organisation, and how? And do it in person, stroke in the current environment by Zoom. Don't just send an email.
Yeah. Martin, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, there's a few points coming out there, but one of the things that struck me, certainly with some of my family-owned clients, is that there's a need to teach them how to run a business. There's a need to teach them how to operate as a board. Most people will probably never been on a training course or been taught how to run a business. Just for Andy or Sean, then, how often do you find yourself re-educating the board on how to actually conduct a decent board meeting?
Can I go first on that, if I may? So one of the roles I do for gunnercooke is we work with, they're called In Professional Development. They do management and leadership courses, and I deliver 5 courses for them. And one of them is the role of the managing director. And I would say without exception, everyone that's come on the board has said as part of their opening pitch and what they want to get out of the courses, I've had no formal training on this. So actually, I don't know what I'm doing is the right thing, but I don't know what I don't know. And I think, you know, that's probably about 200 people have said that over the last couple of years. So to answer your question, I think there is a lot of actually just educating, you know, what their role is, and actually trying to put some structure and hard lines to give them the confidence that what they're doing is the right thing. I think that's, you know, the key thing. It's not, they're not necessarily not doing the things, they're just not sure if they are doing the right things, and therefore giving them that confidence factor. Sean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I would. But the other piece is that I always take it back to, what is your role? Are you doing your role? Do we all understand what your role is? Are you doing your role? That kind of puts people into a position within the boardroom. And then particularly with family boards, I'm always looking for an independent chair, NED chair. And the reason is it just takes the emotion out of what's going on, but it also, I did it to myself. I found myself as an owner manager on my own as the only director of the company. So I brought in non-execs and I made myself accountable to an independent chair, because that way I behaved appropriately in the boardroom, because I was, you know, almost under interrogation once a month by my 3 non-execs who were there. And getting the value of that independence, particularly in the leadership role. And if with family boards, they don't, it's not something they'll grab immediately, but when someone starts to put a bit of structure in front of them through the NED role, often they'll migrate to, well, why don't you chair the meeting? Because you are actually putting some structure there, and I don't have to worry about what's going to happen in that meeting. So it's how do you bruise the fruit a couple of times without offending. And we all know that what you go into a family boardroom is that you find the MD's the son and the chairman's the dad who's moved up, who's still trying to be MD without the title. And so it's for that education piece, if you can get people to go and learn what good looks like, at least you've got a reference point.
Yeah, and if you haven't got that, just take a baseball with you.
Yeah, well, do you know what? Uzi 9mm half a clip of bullets normally works.
Yeah, big stick with nail and it usually works well.
I think one of the, just going back to something Andy was saying as well around that sort of dissemination of information, and it links to what Sean was just saying, having that independence on the board when a decision has been taken or strategic decision has been taken. All too often I've found is that it might be agreed at the board and then the family members go away and have another discussion and suddenly it changes. But having that independence and coming back to something that we said earlier about documenting those decisions, that's absolutely critical to keep people on a consistent track. Because in the worst case scenario, different parts of the family go off after the meeting and have their own little meetings and come up with different ideas or different solutions, and you think you've resolved it and then suddenly you realize you haven't. So yeah, having that independence on the board, whether that's a chair or whether it's a non-exec, and real documenting out those decisions is something that I found differentiates those family businesses that work effectively and those that don't. So in terms of looking at family businesses that as they start to pull together the vision and strategy, what's best practice look like? How can you Andy, Sean, what have you done to help facilitate that process?
I'll allow you go first, Sean.
Yeah, well, we're back to the old situation of the difference between vision, strategy, and tactics. And what you immediately find in a family boardroom is that what they believe is strategy is actually tactical, because they want to talk about what's currently going on. And the difficulty is saying what is the vision? what and you know, on a as we discussed earlier, it could just be a level of EBITDA, and you're not going to go, you're not going to get the money work further from that. But you know, it could be that you want to achieve this part niche in the marketplace, etc. So it's separating the vision from the strategy, and then obviously breaking down within the strategy the steps that need to be taken to deliver the vision. And that's the biggest challenge, because this interaction, and I think we all struggle with it, this interaction between what is strategy and what is vision. But you know, if a vision is more than a sentence long, then it isn't a vision, it's a strategy, as a rule of thumb. So it's introducing that concept. And then once you've got at least one vision statement out there, then flowing coherently down into what strategies then need to be followed, or what discovery needs to be achieved to get to the next step. But if you move to the strategy piece too quickly, you just lose the vision. It just gets washed out, because it comes all about what am I going to do, or what are we going to do, as opposed to, you know, our vision is that, and we need to cross-reference back to that every time.
Yeah, I think
it gives you that guiding light, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes back to the bit that we were talking earlier, the question you asked earlier, Martin. There's an education piece, as Sean said. You know, what is the difference between vision and strategy? And I think in my experience, it's sitting down and taking them through some examples of what a vision looks like. I don't think you can expect them just to come up with that one-line strap line. And I take, you know, small businesses, some big businesses, and give them examples of what their vision is. So, for example, you know, YouTube, I use this as a case study in some of my lecturing. YouTube had a vision back in 2012. They were the market leader, but they had a vision to go from 100 million viewable hours on YouTube a day to 1 billion within 4 years. And that became their vision that drove the business for the next 4 years. It doesn't have to be, you know, different elements of it. It can be, you know, viewable hours. In that case, as Sean said, it can be EBITDA, it can be a level of market share, it can be, we want to do international expansion, whatever it is, it's getting something down that they can hang their hat on and go, that's where we want to go. And then you can start to put the building blocks in place of the strategy of how they're going to get there. And sometimes I find that people try and rush that vision. Take your time. Yeah, there's no clock here. Don't feel you have to sit down with the management team and actually construct, you know, what that vision is, you know, in that first session. I think YouTube actually took 12 months to actually define what their vision actually was. So don't put any time frame on it. Don't rush it. Make sure that there's that collective input that goes, that is the direction we want to go to in the next 3 to 5 years. And once you're all pointing in the right direction, yeah, then you can start to build your strategy out.
Yeah, totally agree.
I was just going to say something here. I'm marking down lots of areas for next session, because I would have thought that actually in that vision conversation, there's going to be a lot of clashes of interest, particularly if you've got the different generations in the mix. Because I suppose, I didn't come to the succession one, but you know, some people might be thinking, right, my vision is I'm getting out of here as soon as possible. Yep. And others might going, right, want to go down more digital route or whatever. And so do you find that as you talk, all these different underlying interests are coming out and people are doing positioning? And because obviously as a mediator, that's, you know, people come out with a position and then you really have to delve deep to find out what's underneath the surface and what's driving their emotions, etc. So I don't know whether you want to talk about that now, or we can save it for next time. But
well, it's probably one to talk about conflict, but to answer the question you've asked, Rebecca, absolutely, it brings other matters to the fore. So, but that's good, because you're bringing them to the table then. So, okay, the commonality is about trying to achieve a vision, but yeah, you get these other areas that actually suddenly have been raised and disclosed, and you're able to talk about. And the thing is, you have to start to partition them. There's other areas that you need to think about, succession, or people want to get out over a set time frame. But it's trying to keep that focus of where the vision is. And along the journey, if you can pick up these other pockets of information that helps you go, okay, how are we going to get there despite all of these factors? At least you're aware and there's clarity on what those factors are. So absolutely, it brings, some added complications to the party. But I see that as a positive thing, because you're aware of them then. It's when you're not aware of them.
The agility that's required is to take the outcomes, the individual outcomes, and bear in mind that they should really only want one outcome. They can't have a whole family of outcomes as individuals, and then see where the alignment is. Because if someone wants to leave the business, the facilitation for doing that could be the turnover or the EBITDA that demonstrates that. And once you've aligned those together, if someone's obsessed with market share, then basically you have to build it up that says, well, if we're going to go after market share, what level of profitability do we need to achieve in what time scale? And then once you pin that down, then you often find there's 3 or 4 outcomes have been sorted with one focus, which is basically we want this much market share. Or more typically, if you do an ACE scorecard and move from right to left, invariably the box on the right hand side is EBITDA. It's so probably 7 times out of 10 it's EBITDA.
Yeah.
And you flow back from it. But it's easier to align the outcomes if you know what the outcomes are, and invariably they do dovetail into each other.
Yeah. One of the what I found, I've done a lot of work in construction and support services over the last 10-15 years, and there is on a pretty regular occurrence where family businesses have got involved, grown quite quickly, and although absolutely, they've got a common objective in terms of what they want to achieve from an EBITDA perspective, or revenue, or market share, or whatever. Those conflicts tend to get involved, and what I've seen quite frequently is that in those industries tend to be more male brothers rather than sisters, but I think that may be just down to the sector. But different brothers then take leadership roles in different divisions. So someone might have house building, someone might have pipeline, someone might have scaffolding, and build that business up and almost run it as in their own little fiefdom. But you're always having to come back to say, as a group, what does that mean? And there's been some interesting challenges when different brothers have taken their areas and their focus in different directions, trying to bring that at the group, which is in many cases led to, and it comes back to the conversation that we had earlier with Daniel, in many cases has led to those businesses separating off and being created as a new entity, because they haven't been able to bring it back at a group level. What any experience that Sean, Andy, or anybody else has had in that sort of area?
From my perspective, Tony, you always come back to leadership. Where is the leadership? Within the boardroom, and therefore where does it flow? And the scenario you just described is the more than one leader, and therefore by definition, the leader's going to take a section of an organisation in a certain direction. I confronted that in my SME business, where basically I believed I was providing the leadership, but then discovered that as soon as I walked out of the room, that my family members went off and did something different. So I had to put a management structure together that said, I'm sorry, lads, but you're lads and lasses, you're accountable to me. And one of the things that I've written down is, once you get down to organisational roles, the thing I've discovered with family businesses, the next best thing I would do is bring in a HR partner, so that there is a consistency of HR behaviour throughout the whole of the organisation. and that then reflects back onto the boardroom, because they have to be consistent, because it's a professional sat in front of them that's telling them what they can and what they can't do.
Yeah.
You know, so and that then starts to distill down the fact that within an organisation there is one leadership position. So therefore, who is it and what is it, and does it behave correctly? Daniel, you got your hand up. Is that a question?
Well, it's more a thought, actually. I see this as three different layers. For me, the first layer is the vision, but for me, the vision is more about who are we or who do we want to be. Mm-hmm. Then you have the mission, and to Andy's example, you know, YouTube, you know, have I don't know, 100 million subscriptions in by the end of March or something. Okay, and then the what is the strategy, and out of the strategy you have a number of tactical initiatives. But what I find is what I describe here, you know, appeals to larger organizations. They like to split it. But in family business, point number 1 and 2 often come together, because it's a delicate question of asking, what is your vision? It's basically, asking them who they are and who they want to be. And the family will say, we're the family, we run the business. So the mission and the vision get blurred, and I don't know whether that's good or bad. I also put it in the group as a question, but I don't know. I don't know what's the best option here.
Anyone got any views?
You've got to retain the clarity of the vision. If there's crossover between the two, then it just creates space for creativity of what we're really aiming to do. So I think back to what Andy was saying, you've got to put the level of effort into the vision, and once you have it, doesn't mean you can't come back and review it, but you have to review it formally. But you've got to stick with it, and it's painful initially, but you've got to stick with it.
I think I read a quote quite recently about vision, that if it is too open-ended, and you go, right, we're all going to meet at 12 o'clock on Saturday in Central Europe, and you've got someone that goes to France, and you've got someone who goes to Switzerland, and you've got someone who goes to Germany, where actually they go, we're going to meet at 12 o'clock in Zurich, and it's that clarity. You all know where you're actually going, and as I said earlier, Daniel, that shouldn't be rushed. Yeah, you've got to take your time to get to that point. That's not about trying to delve into the strategy too quickly. That's what often happens. Before you've actually agreed the vision, people go into the strategy, and therefore it causes conflict. You've got to set that. What's the direction we're going in first? Once that is solidified, you've got something to hang your hat on. If you haven't got that, you haven't got things to hang your hat on, and it's just going to build ultimately more conflict further down the line. So you've just got to stick in there and see it through, and take your time in terms of that commonality of where you're going.
Okay, we're just quickly approaching the hour mark. So any questions or comments or thoughts before we close it from anybody? No? Well, thanks again to Andy and Sean in particular, and the rest of you for contributing and coming along today. As I said at the start, this is the third in the series of 5. The next one, Rebecca, will be getting very heavily involved in talking about the conflict management side and mediation. That's in 2 or 3 weeks' time after Easter. Sorry, just someone's trying to call me. So this will be recorded, so it'll be available through the website if you want to share it with anybody. But yeah, once again, thank you very much for your interest, and look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
That's great.
Bye.
Thanks,
Andy.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye.